Howdy and welcome. My name is Roel Lopez. I'm with the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, and we're here once again at Bamberger Ranch to continue with our Leopold Live episodes. Leopold Live is a virtual field day, and it's a way of us illustrating some of the tools that Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife management, described in teaching his philosophy of wildlife management. And so we'll continue with that conversation here in Leopold's living room, if you will, at the Bamberger Ranch. And I'd like to welcome and say howdy to my colleague and friend, Dr. April Sampson, who's the executive director of Bamberger.
Well, thank you, Roel. But don't you mean Plowdy?
Yes, that's today's tool. You're right. So today we'll be talking a little bit about the plow, and April's going to tell us a little bit about our expert speakers, commentators, and kick us off here this morning.
That's right. Thank you again, Roel. We're very excited to have you guys all here and welcome you virtually to the Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve. We're excited to be collaborating with the Natural Resources Institute on this very useful and informative series. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we're very, very happy to welcome some expert commentators who are joining us remotely via Facebook Live. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce those folks who are going to be helping with resources, helping field questions. They're really a wealth of information. So we have Dr. Maureen Frank, Dr. John Chomachek, Andy James, and the famous Romy Swanson. Thank you all for being here and helping, or participating remotely with us and helping. Without further ado, I would really like to take the great pleasure to introduce our expert visitor today, who's Dr. Larry Redmond. He's the Associate Department Head of Soil and Crop Sciences, and basically what that means is he knows a lot about a lot. And so he's the perfect expert to join us today for our discussion of the plow in terms of how Leopold imagined it as a tool for wildlife and habitat management. So Larry, thanks for being here and take it away.
Thank you, April, for that very kind introduction. I appreciate that very much. And it is a real pleasure to join NRI and Bamberger Ranch here today for this episode of Leopold Live. So as Dr. Lopez said, Aldo Leopold is the father of game management. He wrote the first book on game management, published in 1933. And in the preface to that book, he mentioned 5 tools: the axe, the plow, the cow, the fire, and the gun were the same tools that had been used to destroy wildlife and wildlife habitat. But if we thought about that and thought about how we could use those tools creatively, we could actually use the same tools to restore not only wildlife habitat, but wildlife populations. And so when we think about his book, there's a chapter where he deals with cover and managing cover. And what he's talking about is plant succession and managing plant succession. Plant succession is the unilateral direction of plant communities changing over time. And in the hill country, that means that everything will become dominated by woody species over time. And that does not provide good wildlife habitat for very many species at all. Wildlife habitat needs to have as much diversity in plant species as possible, because that leads then to a large amount of wildlife species on that particular property. So if we cover everything up with a big old cedar brake, then we don't have a lot of good wildlife habitat. So as Leopold was talking about, he said 4 of those tools, the axe, plow, cow, and the fire, could be used to basically reverse succession. I like to think about it as a manager in terms of hitting the reset button and setting things back to an earlier cereal stage so that we can maximize not only plant species diversity, but also wildlife species diversity. So today we're talking about the plow. And the plow is an interesting instrument. We've used it to plow up habitat for centuries and destroy wildlife habitat, but we can also use that same instrument to come back and help restore wildlife habitat and that benefit those populations. So Jared is out there and he is going to walk across some treatment strips that the fine people here at Bamberger Ranch have placed on this plot here. And really, I say the fine people, I'm talking about Steve Fulton, who is the ranch manager, and he's the one that came out and did all this for us. So the first strip that we're looking at there is a heavy disc area. It was disked 1 week ago. And if you look at that, you think, well, we have probably destroyed all the vegetation on that plot. We have not. What we have done is introduce some soil disturbance. And soil disturbance is very important for having seed germinate and give us new plants. So disturbance is very important. So if you look at that, it looks like bare ground. It's not going to be bare ground long. We'll show you the results of that in just a second. But it's also very useful for building a fire break. A lot of prescribed fires used in Texas, and fire breaks, of course, are part of getting ready for a prescribed fire. And so you can also use that plow, if you will, to create that fire break. So as we move a little bit to the left and look at the next strip, we'll see that what that is a heavy disc area that was conducted 5 weeks ago. And so it's no longer bare soil. As you can see, we've got a lot of vegetation that has emerged there. And although you see mostly Johnson grass, if you were to go in and look straight down, you would see a lot of other, what cattlemen call broadleaf weeds, we call forbs in wildlife, and they're very beneficial for wildlife. And so that's what that site looked like 5 weeks after a heavy disking. Now, as we continue to move across the plots, we'll look at an area that was lightly disked 5 weeks ago, and you can see again the response of the vegetation, of tremendous Johnson grass response there. But again, if you could look down into the plot, you would see a lot of other broadleaf plants that are starting to show up there. As we move across the plots even further to the left, we'll see an area that was lightly disked 1 week ago. And so it looks a little bit different, except they've had some pretty good rainfall out here. And so we've got some pretty good Johnson grass developing in that site as well. So as Jared continues to move through the plot area, the next treatment he's going to come to is actually a non-treatment or a control, where we didn't do anything to the vegetation there. And so you can see what it would look like. In fact, if you compare that to some of the other sites, the strips in there, you'll see that the control looks very much like the other sites that were either heavily disked or lightly disked. And then finally, we're going to come out of the control strip into a treatment there that looks a little yellow. And what we've done there is we've sort of expanded the use of the term plow to include herbicide as well. And herbicide is a very effective tool. It can be very economic if it's used in strategic ways. But if you look and see, sometimes we want to control a lot of the herbaceous vegetation. And in this case, trying to control or suppress Johnson grass so that the forbs, the broadleaf plants underneath, can have a chance to germinate, capture sunlight, and grow and be beneficial to the wildlife population. Excuse me. Now, when we talk about herbicides, herbicides are an important use or an important tool to manage not only herbaceous vegetation, but also brush species. If you look, again, I said if we didn't do anything out here in the hill country, South Texas, North Texas, West Texas, anywhere in the state and across the U.S., many of these areas would become dominated by woody species. So sometimes we have to go in and take out maybe some wholesale blocks of brush. And depending on the goals and the objectives of the ranch plan, then we have to think about the economics and be strategic in how much of that vegetation we're going to remove. We can remove sizable amounts of brush and not impact the wildlife populations, but we have to think about what it's going to cost. How are we going to benefit the wildlife with those large or broad scale applications? And then again, we can use small scale like we're doing here in this plot, or something like individual plant treatment, where we can use a remedy diesel treatment and go in and just treat the stems of individual plants and not have any impact on any other plant, only the ones that we're trying to target and take out. So I know Steve has used a lot of this herbicide here on the ranch, or at least some. So Steve, why don't you tell us how you've used it?
Well, thank you, Dr. Redmond, for joining us and sharing your expertise. Yes, on the Bamberger Ranch, we have used herbicide. is definitely a tool that we keep in our toolbox and use often enough. We do very little broad scale application. Mostly how we use herbicide is I guess more like the axe, where we're taking out individual brush species, something that's less desirable. But we do some foliar application. The only concern that we have, or one of our major concerns we use in chemical application here on the ranch, is our recharge zones. And we discussed that briefly with our axe segment the first week. Our recharge zone are these mesa-like hilltops, and that all that water, all that rainfall that falls on those hilltops is directly recharging our aquifers that we use in-house. And so it's very important to us that water stay clean and healthy. Yeah. But the plow as a tool has been used here on the ranch extensively from the very beginning. Again, the axe and the plow, these are tools that have some bleed over, and especially with the initial restoration of the Bamberger Ranch, with the removal of large blocks of brush with the bulldozer.
Right.
And as anybody's seen a bulldozer work, you know that there's quite a bit of disturbance to that soil profile when that machine is working to clear that brush. And then with some after treatments with the general plow that we have behind us here, to prepare those seed beds initially to get those native grasses established. So opening up, giving space for those native grasses to be able to grow up and be what it needs to be, basically, as well as with all the forbs, the beneficial forbs that come up there. Now, this particular spot, I do use these plows behind me twice annually, and to help us explain why we're here and why we're talking about the plow at this particular location, we have our biologist on staff, Christina. She's going to tell us a little bit about this area.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So the area that we are at right now, we call the bird feeder. And as the viewers have seen this area, you'll notice it does not look like a typical bird feeder, but that's because this is an area where we have and still do manage for seed producing and flowering plants for the benefit of our wildlife populations. So a food plot like this one is going to be really beneficial for not just our cattle and our white-tailed deer or our hoofstock, but our birds, my favorite, because we have a lot of ground-dwelling birds who are readily foraging on available seeds, especially thinking about those ground dwellers. We have a lot of them, like our doves. We've got quail out here, thrashers, juncos, sparrows are going to receive a huge benefit from a food plot like this one, where we're really managing for the health of those seed-producing plants. And I'll go ahead and mention a conversation we've had earlier about the importance of surveying for your wildlife whenever you're managing in an area like this. And so what I mean is doing a pre-evaluation survey and a post-evaluation survey. So pre-evaluation survey, take a look at your soils, your vegetation, and the wildlife that you have in your area. Implement your management technique, whatever it may be that's right for your acreage, and then come in at a certain time later and do your post-evaluation surveys to see if you notice changes. And just to mention the ranch specifically with the evaluations that we do, I'll give the example of when the property was bought in 1969. In a typical year, we'd get about 48 species of birds, which might sound like a lot until I tell you that we did just a single bird count last week and got 49 species in the matter of a few hours. And so now coming into present day, when we do our post-evaluation surveys, we're looking at 100+ birds in a year. So we know that the management techniques that we have implemented, we're doing something right by using those evaluation surveys.
So back to these food plots, we have a couple of food plots on the property, and what we target mostly birds for these food plots. So when I plant these food plots, I'm looking at stuff that produces a nice seed, like millet, milo, iron and clay pea, Paradovic sunflower. Again, these things that are going to grow up and produce that nice seed. But also, whenever you lightly disc these areas, we have a lot of our native forbs that come up, and one of our main native forbs that all the birds that eat seeds tend to love. And you can get this popping up anywhere out here. If you just scratch the ground a little bit, it pops right up. And that's doveweed. It's a type of croton, very prolific here, and one of those great pioneer plants that help to begin those beginnings of getting that soil colonized,
right,
and so it can lead to later plant succession.
Yeah. And so a couple of points there to discuss is back to Christina's comments about post evaluation. So you do something you implement a plan, and you do the post survey, collect records. This is critical to the success of any plan, whether it's a cattle management plan, a whitetail deer management plan, whatever that might be. We need to collect data. We need to have a written plan that outlines where we're headed, how we're going to try to get there. And then after we implement the plan, we collect data, we monitor, and that's a key word. We monitor to see, is the plan, is it doing what we want it to do? And if it's not doing what we want it to do, then we need to change the plan. We need to alter it, maybe a little tweak, maybe a major change. But we can't ever accomplish what we're trying to accomplish if we don't collect that data and look at our plan and do these monitoring surveys, just like Christina was talking about. And playing off a comment that Stephen made about the lightly disking here is the way he treats this bird feeder food plot. I like the light disking. The heavy disking, I think, leaves you a little bit prone to some soil erosion loss if you were to get a heavy rain, if you're a little bit of a slope or something. And so to protect from that, a light disking is really all that you need, because you get enough soil disturbance with the light disking that you're going to have those native plants, just like Stephen was talking about, the crotons, those things that are going to pop up. Great value for bird feed. But you're also going to have some other things pop up that can be very, very valuable as far as whitetail deer forage also. And while we're talking about food plots, let's talk a little bit about deer food plots, because I know y'all don't do a lot of that, but I think out here in this part of the state, when we get west of Interstate 35, moisture availability becomes problematic, and it becomes harder and harder to dependably plant and have a crop that you think is going to either feed the deer during supplemental time or whatever. And so when we get west of Interstate 35, south of Interstate 37, we really probably need to start thinking about a pelleted feed. East of that line, a single crop, or sometimes further east, a double crop will work for deer. But I think if you're out here, you're going to see some oat patches. People plant for cattle during the fall. That's a great bait and place to hunt deer. But I think if you're really interested in deer, you're going to be using some sort of a pelleted feed. So, Stephen, what do y'all do for deer on the ranch here?
That's exactly what we do for deer on the ranch, as far as providing that extra supplement. Not trying to increase our numbers, but just trying to increase the health of the deer that we have. Yeah. And you're exactly right with food plots. These food plots, a lot of the things I plant here and a lot of things that come up in here are very beneficial to deer, and they do have access to it. It's just when we have a year we have enough rainfall to grow a great food plot, we have plenty of forage on the ranch naturally for the deer to consume. Right. And then we have that year we have a very little rainfall amount, which seems that's more likely the year we're going to have every year on average. Then we can't get our food plots to grow, and at the same time, our native forages there's less of it and less nutritional value. Yeah. So going with a pelleted feed is the way to go.
So Larry?
Yes, sir.
If I could ask you and Steve a question.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about scale, broad versus local, when you're talking about treatments?
Yeah, so if we're thinking about broad scale treatments, then again, that's where we're looking at larger size blocks of land that have a lot of woody cover on it. And so when we're thinking about that, we're not using a ground rig anymore. We're going to be applying herbicide using either a helicopter or fixed wing, one of those. And so you have to really look. Again, it boils down to the ranch plan that you have, and you've got specific goals and objectives. The goals are what you're going to try to accomplish, and the objectives are how you're going to get there. And so if one of the goals is to open this up and make this a little more diverse community, then we're going to have to think about spending some money to come in with some sort of an aerial application of herbicide. Okay, now on the smaller scale, again, it could be just a 1/4 acre food plot, it could be a few acres, something like that, or we can get down just to the individual plant treatment. I mentioned the Remedy Diesel. That's my favorite because, number one, you don't have to have a license to buy Remedy, and number two, it is so effective. You can do it any time of the year, any day of the year, as long as you don't have frozen ground or standing water. It's just a very effective way to manage individual plants. Now, if you're looking for some guidance on which herbicide to use on which brush species, then we have an excellent publication. It's called ERM 1466. And if you can get that free at the AgriLife bookstore, it has a tremendous amount of information in there. So if you just want to control mesquite, for example, there's broadcast, large-scale operation efforts that will be described in there. There's also individual plant treatment options in there. And there will be several herbicides that will be listed, and they will show you whether it's a very low efficacy or a very high or some sort of a moderate or high. And we spend a lot of time as a herbicide use committee getting that information. And what we do is when we look at brush species, we actually go and look 24 months after application to see, did it resprout? How much true mortality did we have? And that's how we assign those ratings. And so it's all based on science, it's all based on data. But get you a copy, it's free, and you can thumb through there and find those species that are of problems for you, and then you can identify the best herbicide and the best method for treating those plants.
Larry, kind of a follow-up,
Yeah.
a little bit about the costs. What's the relative cost between these treatments from scale and just the treatment itself?
I haven't checked the cost on that, Dr. Lopez, in many years, but I'm going to suggest that when I used to be aware of those things, I mean, it used to be anywhere from $35 to about $50 an acre aerial application. Now, with the increased cost of fuel and insurance and labor costs and all that, I would just be hesitant to actually put a number on that.
But just you're giving us a relative difference,
Yes.
which is good.
Yes.
That's what I'm looking
And
for.
so, and that, when you start thinking, if we're just doing 50 acres, okay, that's one thing. But if we're talking about treating hundreds or thousands of acres on some of these larger pieces of property, it can be a sizable investment. And so, again, you have to weigh the costs and look and see what the potential benefits of that treatment might be. And so, if we're just spraying pasture out here with some sort of a herbicide, you know, you're looking at probably $15 an acre for most herbicide treatments out there. Remedy Diesel, that is going to be so cheap just to go around and paint the lower 12, 15 inches of those smooth bark stems. I mean, I won't say it's free, but it's pretty inexpensive, and it's a way to just take out select plants that are a problem for you. And you can go in there and take those out with no problem using that Remedy Diesel.
Another follow-up question, Larry,
Yeah.
is, and I'm going to ask Jared to kind of zoom in. Can you tell us a little bit about the plows behind you? What are the differences and the advantages, disadvantages?
Well, so on the right-hand side here of your screen is a tandem disc. When we talk about the plow, and of course the plow was one of the earliest farm implements that we had, you know, and what it was designed to do was to completely invert the soil. And then the farmer would come in and plant on top of that. I don't like a plow because if I invert the soil out here, I have buried all of my native seed under 6 inches of soil, and that seed will never germinate and see the light of day. And so when we think about using the plow, what we're really doing is using typically a tandem disc. The nice thing about a tandem disc is almost every piece of property has a tractor and a tandem disc. I mean, you just almost could not go to a piece of property and not find those two pieces of equipment. And so this is great for the light disking. Now, it can also be used to heavy disc, But if you just, set the amount of pressure that you want on those disc blades, and you don't want the disc blades at a really sharp angle, you would like to have those disc blades fairly straight, because again, we're not trying to do massive soil disturbance. We're just trying to do a light disking operation. And so over here behind me right here is spring-tooth Harrow. And spring-tooth Harrow can be used to do the same kind of operation. It's not going to do as much disturbance, but it's also not, you're not going to be in danger of getting too deep and doing too much disturbance with it. Stephen, what's been your experience with these?
Pretty much exactly what you just said. A light disking for this food plot, we'll just do a 2-pass. Mm-hmm. Just go over it once, go back over it a second time. That's our light disking. Now, if we really want to do a heavy disking, we might have to go over it 5 or 6 times. It depends, and again, it depends on how hard your soil is. If it's been a while since it rained, or if it's got a nice moisture content to it, it'll disc a little more cleanly that way. The spring-tooth Harrow, if it's really hard, especially on the surface, we'll use that. It'll take a little bit of bite. Again, it won't go very deep, but it'll definitely break that surface up if it's got a hard pan.
Yep. And then, of course, over here on the other side behind, but sort of between Christina and Stephen, is a spray rig. And a lot of people will have a spray rig. And the thing about spray rigs, you can own your own if you can justify the use of that, because a lot of people will use one for 2 or 3 days and they park it, and then it sits up for 51 weeks, and then next year you got to go dig the dirt dauber nest out, the spray nozzles and all that, and get it working again. So a lot of times it's not advantageous to us to own a lot of equipment, but again, if you can justify the use and you're going to be using it quite a bit, own your own spray rig. Otherwise, there's people in town that can come and help you and do that. And they're set up, you don't have to worry about having a license, keeping the records and those kinds of things. That's on them. And so it just depends on how you want to do that. But again, we like the individual plant treatments. We can do foliar treatments, or we can do the remedy diesel. And those take, if a foliar treatment is what we're using, it's primarily going to be mostly water. It's going to be basically 99% water, 1% of herbicide. You'll have some surfactant in there. But it's very, very economical, as is the remedy diesel. It's a little more expensive because of the diesel in there. But you can just get a pump-up sprayer to use for that. I used to say that I like the 1 gallon because it was fairly light. You could buy one down at Walmart or something, and you use it and wear it out, and then go buy you another one. And then I was challenged in an audience one day about that. A guy said, no, the 1 gallon deal is not right. You need to use a 2 gallon. And I said, okay, well, why do you like the 2 gallon better? And he said, you don't have to bend over as far to pump it up. And I said, you know what? I like that idea. So I'm using 2 gallons now. So anyway, so the equipment can be very inexpensive depending on if you're just doing spot treatment, or you can spend some money on some bigger rigs.
They also have backpack sprayers as well.
Yes, in fact, I've become quite a fan of backpack sprayers because as I get older, even that 2 gallon gets to be kind of heavy toting around. So backpack sprayer, you can carry 3 gallons around if you want to, and it's a lot easier on me, that's for sure.
One other use for a sprayer like this is if you are going to be prescribed burning, these are useful to help put in your black lines beforehand, or actually the day of your fire to help put out hot spots. Yeah, they are useful for that as well.
Excellent point. Excellent point on that.
There's a question for Christina with regards to birds, and I guess the question is with regards to the application of the plow. Are there differences or techniques, and what sort of a group of birds can you expect from a given treatment? Let's say the heavy disc, 1-2 weeks versus maybe a month later.
Yeah, what first comes to mind is something that we've already mentioned, which is that the light disking is really going to see the most benefit for our birds, because that's going to introduce us to those, seeds, our natives that are just right under the soil, and expose them and get them to germinate. And in terms of the birds that this is most going to benefit, definitely, You know, we're getting into the winter months right now where we have a lot of winter residents coming into the area and a lot of ground dwellers. So some of those birds I mentioned earlier, your doves, quail, juncos, sparrows, who are generally, when you think about them, on the ground foraging. And they're going to receive a huge benefit from all of these seed producers that we're rejuvenating here with our plow efforts.
To add to that, when you're going into an habitat to use the plow to improve that habitat, if you have plans to treat that every year, don't treat the same place every year. Spread it around. 1 year treat over here, next year treat over here, and keep that mosaic. That's what's natural. It gives you the most edge, so you'll get the most benefit from what we found.
And let me play off of that just a little bit, because some of the people tuning in may not understand quite what we mean by mosaic. And mosaic, if you think in terms of what you would think of, if it was a mosaic pattern on a shirt or a dress or something like that, it's a bunch of different colors and patterns. And that's what we really like to see out here on the land when we're talking about wildlife habitat. We'd like to see a mosaic of different kinds of different habitats interspersed among that landscape. And so you could have something that was primarily a grassland and manage it just for that. You could have an area that you say you come in and run a prescribed fire through every 5 or 6 years. That's going to create a different kind of a habitat. And then maybe over here, you alternate 2 years and you burn that place every 5 or 6 years. So what you're doing is you're creating all different kinds of habitat types that is so beneficial, because the more habitat types we have, again, it's about plant species diversity. And the more plant species diversity we have, the more wildlife species diversity we have too. So thanks for bringing that up, Stephen. That's a great point.
Larry, Steve did talk about edge. Can you tell us a little bit about edge and what that means from a wildlife perspective?
Well, and so edge is kind of for me, it's kind of a interesting because we have hard edges and we have these soft edges. And so a hard edge is like right here. Well, you can't see it. People are not looking back there. But behind Roel and April, here in a little bit, we'll go back to them and you'll see just a line of very tall brush. And then it just immediately ends. And here we are into this grassland community. That's a hard edge. And so where you have a soft edge, it's going to be sort of it's softer. So we're going to go from that. We're going to transition over a period of, it could be 100 yards or 150 yards, a quarter mile, whatever it is. But we're going to go from tall to intermediate down to that grassland community. So I like soft edges. They're better for me than a hard edge. Hard edge doesn't quite seem to have quite the wildlife species diversity there. But boy, when you start getting over a soft edge, and let's use another term for people, we'll use the term ecotone. When we're transitioning from one ecological type to another ecological type, you'll have a plant community that is unique to this area, a plant community that's unique to this area. But as you transition from one to the other, you have an overlap of all of these different plant species. And so the wildlife species richness there is just tremendous. And so hard edge, soft edge, hard edges are typically man-made. I mean, that's what I think of. You'll have a forest in the field. But soft edges are what you're going to see more naturally. And if you're sculpting your place, and the Brush Busters uses the term brush sculpting, if you're actually sculpting your place, you can actually make and create your own soft edge as you transition from one area to another. And so thank you, Dr. Lopez, for bringing that up.
Excellent. And really that's a great example with what is behind us, hard versus soft. And what Jared was showing is an example of a soft edge that I think is what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that, Larry, Steve, Christina, I'd like to thank the three of you and, of course, the folks on the line for the great conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, we kind of look at this as being in the living room of Aldo Leopold to talk about the 5 tools and how they could be applied by landowners, by natural resource professionals in a way that can mimic and improve what Mother Nature continues to do on a daily basis. So again, we're trying to mimic a process in terms of manipulating succession in a way that could be beneficial long term. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to my colleague, April here, to sort of wrap things up. Again, appreciate everyone joining us here at Leopold Live on Bamberger Ranch.
Yes, thank you, Roel. And I'll just echo that. Thank you to all of the people that have come together on the team to make this happen. Thank you to Brandon for being our sound engineer today and really helping out that way. And thank you to the incredibly talented staff here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve. I'm really proud of showcasing them here in this Leopold Live series because they're amazing, as you can see. We really hope that you can join us for our next segments of Leopold Live. We're going to be focusing on the other tools that we haven't yet talked about. I think this discussion about the plow and different ways to sort of conceptualize the plow has been very, very useful today. We hope you'll continue to join us. We would also invite everyone to spend a little time with Leopold. If you haven't gotten the chance to explore his readings and really read his writings, we would really encourage you to do that. The things that he championed are still important today when we talk about habitat management. We also invite you to sign up for our notifications. Follow us, the Bamberger Ranch Preserve, on Facebook. Also follow the Natural Resources Institute of Texas A&M University on their Facebook page. And make sure to sign up for our notifications so that you know when we're going live and you know when we have the next Leopold Live segment coming up. We really, really thank you for joining us today. I'll echo what Roel said to thank the speakers that have helped us field the questions and sort of referee the chat room in terms of Facebook Live. And we will definitely see you next week, where we are going to be talking about the Leopold's tool of the gun. And definitely don't forget that here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And we're so happy to be welcoming everybody virtually to Leopold's living room. We take that as a big compliment, by the way. This is like a giant Leopold's living room here. And in times of where there's not such a craziness, sort of global health crisis going on in the world, we invite people to come out and participate in one of our landowner workshops. We offer public tours of the land, which really more than a tour, it's a showcase of the really wonderful and impressive restoration activities that we have undertaken and still undertake here at the preserve. And so keep an eye on us. Make sure you're following us on Facebook. Check out our website to see when we are offering those kinds of activities again. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely see you next week.
All right. See you later.